Welcome to this educational video on African trypanosomiasis, also known as sleeping sickness. African trypanosomiasis is a parasitic disease that is caused by the Trypanosoma parasite and is transmitted by the tsetse fly. It affects humans and animals in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in rural areas where people depend on agriculture and livestock. In this video, we will discuss the symptoms, diagnosis, and treatment of African trypanosomiasis. We will also explore the epidemiology and transmission of the disease, as well as the efforts being made to control and eliminate it. The symptoms of African trypanosomiasis include fever, headaches, joint pains, and itching. As the disease progresses, it can affect the central nervous system, causing confusion, personality changes, and sleep disturbances. If left untreated, it can lead to coma and death. Diagnosis of African trypanosomiasis is based on clinical signs and symptoms, as well as laboratory tests such as blood smear examination and spinal fluid analysis. Treatment options include drugs such as pentamidine and suramin for the early stage of the disease, and melarsoprol and eflornithine for the late stage. We will also discuss the challenges faced in controlling African trypanosomiasis, including the difficulty in detecting and treating cases in remote areas. We will also explore the importance of research and collaboration in developing new tools and strategies to eliminate the disease. Join us in this informative journey as we delve into the world of African trypanosomiasis and learn about the efforts being made to control and eventually eliminate this devastating disease. Fact 1. African trypanosomiasis, also known as sleeping sickness, is a parasitic disease caused by a protozoan parasite of the Trypanosoma genus. There are two types of African trypanosomiasis: Trypanosoma brucei-gambiense and Trypanosoma brucei-rhodigense. T.B. gambiense is responsible for more than 95% of reported cases and is found in Central and Western Africa, while T.B. rhodigense is found in Eastern and Southern Africa and accounts for the remaining cases. The protozoan parasite responsible for African trypanosomiasis has a complex life cycle that involves multiple stages, including a free-living form in the tsetse fly and a parasitic form in the bloodstream of the human or animal host. The tsetse fly becomes infected with the parasite when it feeds on an infected human or animal. Once inside the fly, the parasite multiplies and undergoes several transformations before migrating to the salivary glands of the fly. When the infected tsetse fly bites a human or animal host, the parasite is transmitted to the bloodstream of the host. In the bloodstream of the host, the parasites multiply and cause damage to various organs and tissues. The parasites can also cross the blood-brain barrier and infect the central nervous system, leading to the neurological symptoms of sleeping sickness. The symptoms of the disease can range from mild to severe and depend on the stage of infection. In the early stages, symptoms may be nonspecific, including fever, headaches, joint pains, and itching. In the late stage, when the parasite has invaded the central nervous system, symptoms can include confusion, personality changes, and sleep disturbances. African trypanosomiasis can be a fatal disease if left untreated. The diagnosis of the disease is based on clinical signs and laboratory tests such as blood smear examination and spinal fluid analysis. Treatment options include drugs such as pentamidine and suramin for the early stage of the disease, and melarsoprol and eflornithine for the late stage. Prevention of African trypanosomiasis involves controlling the population of the tsetse fly, the primary vector of the disease. Efforts to control the disease include the use of insecticide-treated traps and targets to reduce the population of tsetse flies and the use of trypanocidal drugs in animals to prevent the spread of the disease. In conclusion, African trypanosomiasis is a serious parasitic disease caused by a protozoan parasite of the Trypanosoma genus and transmitted by the tsetse fly. The complex life cycle of the parasite and its ability to invade the central nervous system can cause a wide range of symptoms and lead to fatal outcomes if left untreated. Control and elimination efforts for the disease are ongoing and involve a range of strategies, including reducing the population of the tsetse fly and developing new tools for disease control. Fact 2. African trypanosomiasis is a disease that affects both humans and animals in sub-Saharan Africa, with the highest incidence in rural areas where people rely on agriculture and livestock. The disease can have a significant impact on the health and livelihoods of affected communities. In humans, African trypanosomiasis is a major public health problem, with an estimated 10,000 cases reported each year. The disease primarily affects people living in rural areas who are exposed to the tsetse fly, which is found in parts of sub-Saharan Africa where there is suitable vegetation for its survival. Tsetse flies are attracted to movement and are most active during the day, making it difficult for people in affected areas to carry out their daily activities. In addition to its impact on human health, African trypanosomiasis also affects the health of livestock. The disease can cause significant economic losses for rural communities who depend on livestock for their livelihoods. Animals infected with the disease may show symptoms such as weight loss, reduced milk production, and reduced fertility. In severe cases, the disease can lead to death, resulting in the loss of valuable assets for affected households. The impact of African trypanosomiasis on human and animal health is closely linked to the social and economic conditions of affected communities. Rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa often have poor access to health services and limited resources for disease prevention and control. As a result, the disease can spread rapidly and have a significant impact on the health and well-being of affected populations. Efforts to control African trypanosomiasis have focused on a range of strategies, including the development of drugs for treatment, vector control measures to reduce the population of the tsetse fly, and community-based interventions to raise awareness of the disease and promote prevention measures. In recent years, there has been a renewed focus on integrated approaches that address the social, economic, and environmental factors that contribute to the spread of the disease. In conclusion, African trypanosomiasis is a disease that affects humans and animals in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in rural areas where people rely on agriculture and livestock. The disease can have a significant impact on the health and livelihoods of affected communities, highlighting the need for comprehensive approaches to disease prevention and control that address the social, economic, and environmental factors that contribute to its spread. Fact 3. Symptoms of African trypanosomiasis, also known as sleeping sickness, can range from mild to severe and can affect various parts of the body. The early symptoms of the disease can be vague and nonspecific, making it difficult to diagnose. The first stage of the disease, also known as the hemolymphatic stage, is characterized by fever, headaches, joint pains, and itching. The symptoms may be similar to those of other common illnesses, making it challenging to diagnose African trypanosomiasis in its early stages. The infected person may also experience lymph node enlargement, fatigue, and a rash at the site of the tsetse fly bite. As the disease progresses to the second stage, also known as the neurological stage, it can affect the central nervous system, causing more severe symptoms. The symptoms may include confusion, mood swings, difficulty sleeping, seizures, and loss of coordination. The person may also experience abnormal movements, such as muscle tremors, and may become unresponsive. If left untreated, African trypanosomiasis can be fatal, with death occurring within months to a few years after infection. The severity of the disease can vary depending on the type of Trypanosoma parasite responsible for the infection. In addition to the physical symptoms of African trypanosomiasis, the disease can also have social and economic impacts on affected individuals and communities. The symptoms can interfere with a person's ability to work, care for their family, and participate in their community, leading to social isolation and economic hardship. Diagnosis of African trypanosomiasis involves laboratory tests, such as blood tests or a lumbar puncture, to detect the presence of the parasite or antibodies to the parasite. Treatment typically involves medications that are effective against the specific type of Trypanosoma parasite responsible for the infection. In conclusion, African trypanosomiasis can cause a range of symptoms, including fever, headaches, joint pains, itching, and neurological symptoms, and can progress to affect the central nervous system. Early diagnosis and treatment are essential for effective management of the disease and to prevent its potentially fatal consequences. Fact 4. If left untreated, African trypanosomiasis, also known as sleeping sickness, can progress to a severe form of the disease that affects the central nervous system. This can lead to a range of neurological symptoms, including confusion, mood swings, difficulty sleeping, seizures, and loss of coordination. The disease can also cause abnormal movements, such as muscle tremors, and may lead to a state of unresponsiveness. As the disease progresses, the affected person may fall into a coma, which is a state of unconsciousness that can last for days or even weeks. During this time, the person may require supportive care, such as intravenous fluids, to prevent complications such as dehydration. If left untreated, African trypanosomiasis can be fatal, with death occurring within months to a few years after infection. The severity of the disease can vary depending on the type of trypanosoma parasite responsible for the infection. The neurological symptoms associated with African trypanosomiasis can have a significant impact on the person's quality of life and ability to function. They may be unable to work, care for themselves or their family, or participate in their community, leading to social isolation and economic hardship. Fortunately, there are effective treatments available for African trypanosomiasis, particularly if the disease is diagnosed and treated in its early stages. Treatment typically involves medications that are effective against the specific type of trypanosoma parasite responsible for the infection. These medications can be effective in killing the parasite and preventing the progression of the disease. In conclusion, if left untreated, African trypanosomiasis can progress to a severe form of the disease that affects the central nervous system, leading to neurological symptoms, coma, and death. Early diagnosis and treatment are essential to prevent these potentially life-threatening complications and to preserve the person's quality of life. Fact 5. Diagnosing African trypanosomiasis, also known as sleeping sickness, can be challenging because the symptoms can be vague and nonspecific, and may resemble those of other common illnesses. Therefore, a thorough medical history and physical examination are important for identifying potential risk factors, such as travel to areas where the disease is endemic or exposure to tsetse flies. Laboratory tests are also essential for diagnosing African trypanosomiasis. One of the most common tests is a blood smear examination, which involves taking a small sample of blood and examining it under a microscope for the presence of the trypanosoma parasite. However, this test is more effective in the early stage of the disease when the parasite is more abundant in the bloodstream. If the blood smear is negative, a second blood sample may be taken and examined after incubation to increase the sensitivity of the test. Other laboratory tests, such as serological tests that detect antibodies against the parasite, may also be used to support the diagnosis. Spinal fluid analysis, also known as a lumbar puncture, is another important diagnostic tool for African trypanosomiasis. This involves inserting a needle into the lower back and withdrawing a sample of cerebrospinal fluid for analysis. The presence of the trypanosoma parasite in the spinal fluid confirms the diagnosis of the neurological stage of the disease. In addition to laboratory tests, imaging studies, such as magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, or computed tomography, CT, scans, may be used to detect neurological changes associated with the disease. Early diagnosis and treatment of African trypanosomiasis are essential for preventing the disease's potentially fatal consequences. Delayed diagnosis and treatment can lead to irreversible neurological damage and can make treatment more challenging. In conclusion, diagnosing African trypanosomiasis involves a combination of clinical evaluation and laboratory tests, such as blood smear examination and spinal fluid analysis. Early diagnosis is critical to effective treatment and preventing the disease's severe complications. Fact 6. There are several treatment options available for African trypanosomiasis, depending on the stage of the disease and the type of trypanosoma parasite responsible for the infection. For the early stage of the disease, drugs such as pentamidine and suramin are commonly used. Pentamidine is given by intramuscular injection and is effective against the Trypanosoma brucei rhodigens parasite. Suramin is given by intravenous injection and is effective against both T. brucei rhodigens and T. brucei gambiense parasites. These drugs work by killing the parasites in the bloodstream and preventing the disease from progressing to the neurological stage. For the late stage of the disease, when the parasites have crossed the blood-brain barrier and are affecting the central nervous system, more potent drugs such as melarsoprol and eflornithine are used. Melarsoprol is an arsenic-based drug given by intravenous injection and is effective against both T. brucei rhodigens and T. brucei gambiense parasites. Eflornithine is given by intravenous infusion and is effective against T. brucei gambiense parasites. These drugs work by penetrating the blood-brain barrier and killing the parasites in the cerebrospinal fluid. Treatment of African trypanosomiasis can be challenging due to the toxicity of some of the drugs used, and the potential for serious adverse reactions. For example, melarsoprol can cause neurological toxicity, and eflornithine can cause severe allergic reactions. Therefore, treatment is typically administered in a hospital setting, where the patient can be closely monitored for any adverse reactions. In addition to drug therapy, supportive care may also be necessary to manage the symptoms of African trypanosomiasis. This may include treatment of fever, pain, and other symptoms, as well as the management of complications such as dehydration. In conclusion, treatment options for African trypanosomiasis include drugs such as pentamidine, suramin, melarsoprol, and eflornithine, depending on the stage of the disease and the type of trypanosoma parasite responsible for the infection. Treatment can be challenging due to the toxicity of some of the drugs used, and close monitoring is necessary to manage potential adverse reactions. Supportive care may also be necessary to manage symptoms and complications of the disease. Fact 7. African trypanosomiasis, also known as sleeping sickness, has a significant impact on the economy and social well-being of affected communities in sub-Saharan Africa. The disease is primarily found in rural areas where people depend on agriculture and livestock for their livelihoods, and it can have a devastating effect on these communities. Firstly, African trypanosomiasis can have a direct impact on the productivity of livestock, which is a major source of income and food for many people in sub-Saharan Africa. Infected animals may develop symptoms such as weight loss, weakness, and lethargy, which can affect their ability to plow fields or provide milk, meat, or other products for human consumption. In addition, the movement of animals may be restricted to prevent the spread of the disease, which can further limit their economic value. Secondly, the disease can also have indirect impacts on agriculture and food security. The tsetse fly, which transmits the trypanosoma parasites that cause African trypanosomiasis, is attracted to areas with dense vegetation and water sources, which are often also ideal for farming. As a result, affected communities may be forced to abandon or reduce their farming activities, which can lead to decreased food production and increased food insecurity. Thirdly, African trypanosomiasis can also have significant impacts on the health and well-being of affected communities. The disease primarily affects rural populations with limited access to healthcare, and diagnosis and treatment can be difficult and expensive. The disease can also have long-term effects on survivors, including neurological damage and cognitive impairment, which can limit their ability to work and participate fully in society. Finally, the economic and social impacts of African trypanosomiasis can be exacerbated by the fact that it primarily affects marginalized communities, including ethnic minorities and people living in poverty. These populations may already face significant barriers to accessing healthcare, education, and other essential services, and the burden of African trypanosomiasis can further exacerbate these challenges. In conclusion, African trypanosomiasis has significant impacts on the economy and social well-being of affected communities in sub-Saharan Africa. The disease can directly impact the productivity of livestock, indirectly impact agriculture and food security, and have long-term effects on the health and well-being of survivors. The disease primarily affects marginalized communities, which can exacerbate existing inequalities and barriers to accessing essential services. Fact 8. Controlling the population of tsetse flies, which are the primary vectors of African trypanosomiasis, is critical to preventing the spread of the disease. In recent years, efforts have focused on using a combination of insecticide-treated traps and targets, along with the use of trypanocidal drugs in animals, to reduce the transmission of the disease. Insecticide-treated traps are one of the most effective methods for controlling the population of tsetse flies. These traps use a combination of visual and olfactory cues to attract the flies, and are treated with an insecticide that kills them on contact. By placing these traps in areas where tsetse flies are abundant, it is possible to significantly reduce their population over time. In addition to traps, insecticide-treated targets have also been used to control tsetse fly populations. These targets are essentially large cloth sheets that are treated with insecticide, and are placed in areas where tsetse flies are likely to feed. When the flies land on the target, they become coated in the insecticide, which kills them and helps to reduce the overall population. The use of trypanocidal drugs in animals is another important strategy for controlling the spread of African trypanosomiasis. These drugs are typically administered to livestock, which are the primary reservoirs for the disease. By treating infected animals, it is possible to reduce the number of parasites in the environment and prevent the disease from spreading to humans. In addition to these strategies, there are also efforts underway to develop new tools and approaches for controlling tsetse fly populations. For example, researchers are exploring the use of genetic engineering to create tsetse flies that are resistant to the trypanosome parasites that cause African trypanosomiasis. This approach, known as gene-drive technology, could potentially help to eliminate tsetse flies from certain areas and prevent the spread of the disease. Despite these efforts, controlling the spread of African trypanosomiasis remains a significant challenge in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa. The disease is closely tied to poverty and rural livelihoods, and addressing the underlying socioeconomic factors that contribute to its spread is critical to long-term control efforts. In addition, continued investment in research and development is needed to develop new and more effective tools for controlling the tsetse fly population and preventing the spread of the disease. Fact 9. Eliminating African trypanosomiasis as a public health problem is a top priority for the World Health Organization, WHO, and other international organizations. The WHO has set a target of eliminating the disease as a public health problem by 2030, which means reducing the number of reported cases to below 1 case per 10,000 people at risk. To achieve this goal, the WHO has developed a comprehensive strategy for the control and elimination of African trypanosomiasis. The strategy includes a range of interventions, including improving access to diagnosis and treatment, controlling the tsetse fly population, and addressing the underlying socioeconomic factors that contribute to the spread of the disease. Improving access to diagnosis and treatment is critical to reducing the impact of African trypanosomiasis on affected communities. This includes increasing awareness of the disease among healthcare providers and the general public, and providing access to laboratory testing and treatment for those who are infected. Controlling the tsetse fly population is also a key component of the strategy for eliminating African trypanosomiasis. This includes the use of insecticide-treated traps and targets, as well as the use of trypanocidal drugs in animals. In addition, efforts are underway to develop new tools and approaches for controlling tsetse fly populations, including the use of genetic engineering. Addressing the underlying socioeconomic factors that contribute to the spread of the disease is also critical to the long-term elimination of African trypanosomiasis. This includes addressing poverty and promoting sustainable economic development in affected areas, improving access to education and healthcare, and investing in research and development to develop new tools and approaches for controlling the disease. Eliminating African trypanosomiasis as a public health problem would have significant benefits for affected communities. It would improve the health and well-being of millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa, and would also have economic benefits by reducing the impact of the disease on agricultural production and livestock. In addition, it would contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly those related to health and poverty reduction. Overall, eliminating African trypanosomiasis as a public health problem is an ambitious but achievable goal. It requires sustained investment in research and development, as well as collaboration between governments, international organizations, and affected communities to implement effective control and elimination strategies. By working together, it is possible to reduce the burden of this devastating disease and improve the lives of millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa. Fact 10. Research is a critical component of efforts to control and eliminate African trypanosomiasis. Ongoing research is focused on developing new tools and strategies for disease control, including the use of genetic modification to reduce the vector competence of tsetse flies. Tsetse flies are the primary vector for African trypanosomiasis, and reducing their population is a critical component of disease control efforts. Genetic modification is one approach being explored to reduce the vector competence of tsetse flies. This involves modifying the genes of the tsetse fly to reduce their ability to transmit the protozoan parasite that causes the disease. One approach being explored is the use of gene-drive technology to modify the genes of tsetse flies. Gene-drive technology is a technique that involves introducing a specific genetic modification into a population of organisms that is passed on to the next generation at a higher rate than normal. This can be used to rapidly spread a desirable trait, such as resistance to the parasite that causes African trypanosomiasis, through a population of tsetse flies. Another approach being explored is the use of sterile insect technique, SIT, to control the population of tsetse flies. This involves releasing sterile male tsetse flies into the wild, which mate with wild females but produce no offspring. Over time, this can lead to a reduction in the overall population of tsetse flies. In addition to genetic modification, other approaches being explored for disease control include the use of insecticides and the development of new drugs for treatment of the disease. Research is also focused on improving the diagnosis of the disease, particularly in remote and rural areas where access to laboratory testing may be limited. Overall, ongoing research into new tools and strategies for disease control is critical to achieving the goal of eliminating African trypanosomiasis as a public health problem. By continuing to invest in research and development, it is possible to develop more effective and sustainable approaches for controlling the disease, reducing the burden on affected communities, and improving the health and well-being of millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you for watching this video on African trypanosomiasis. We hope this has been informative and helped to raise awareness about this devastating disease. Remember that every effort counts in the fight against African trypanosomiasis, and you can help by supporting organizations that are working towards its control and elimination. Don't forget to like and share this video with your friends and family to spread awareness about African trypanosomiasis. Together, we can make a difference and help to save lives. Thank you again for watching.